The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Windsor Castle, as Captain James Morrison adjusted his scarlet tunic for what felt like the 100th time. At 28, he was the youngest officer to ever command the Queen's Guard, a fact that had earned him both respect and resentment in equal measure. His steel-gray eyes surveyed the assembled guards with military precision, each man standing at perfect attention in their iconic bearskin hats and pristine uniforms. James had earned his position through merit, not privilege. Born in a small mining town in Yorkshire, he had worked his way up through the ranks with determination that bordered on obsession. His father, a coal miner who had died in a cave-in when James was 16, had always told him that respect was earned, never given. Those words echoed in his mind every day as he led men who came from families with centuries of military tradition. The castle was preparing for Queen Camilla's first major state reception since becoming queen consort. Dignitaries from across the Commonwealth were arriving, and security was paramount. James had been briefing his men since dawn, going over every detail of the protocol, every possible scenario that could arise during the event. "Remember, gentlemen," James addressed his guards, his voice carrying the authority that had made him legendary among the ranks. "Today, we represent not just the crown, but the very essence of British tradition. Every eye will be upon us. Every movement must be perfect." Sergeant Williams, a grizzled veteran with 20 years of service, nodded approvingly. He had initially been skeptical of serving under such a young captain, but James had proven himself time and again. The younger guards looked up to their captain with something approaching worship. He had a way of making each man feel essential to the mission, no matter how small their role. As the morning progressed, the castle came alive with activity. Servants hurried through corridors carrying flowers, polishing silver, and making final preparations. The guards took their positions throughout the grounds, each man aware that any mistake could have international consequences. James positioned himself at the main entrance to the throne room, where Queen Camilla would greet her guests. It was the most prestigious posting, traditionally reserved for the most senior officers. Some whispered that he was too young for such responsibility. But James had requested the position specifically. He wanted to prove that he belonged among the elite. The first guests began arriving at noon. James watched as ambassadors, prime ministers, and royal family members from various nations made their way through the receiving line. Each person was announced with formal ceremony, their titles echoing through the grand hall. The queen consort stood regally, her presence commanding respect from everyone in attendance. As James observed the proceedings, he noticed something troubling. A man in the delegation from a small European nation kept glancing nervously around the room, his hand occasionally moving toward his jacket pocket. Years of training had taught James to recognize suspicious behavior, and every instinct screamed that something was wrong. The man was well-dressed, properly credentialed, and had passed through multiple security checkpoints. But there was something in his eyes, a tension in his posture that set James on edge. He began to move closer, maintaining his ceremonial stance while positioning himself for quick action if needed. Queen Camilla was in conversation with the Prime Minister of Canada when James noticed the suspicious guest beginning to move toward the royal party. The man's hand was now clearly reaching inside his jacket, and James could see the outline of something metallic. Without hesitation, James stepped forward, his training taking over. He had to balance protocol with protection, maintaining the dignity of the ceremony while ensuring the Queen's safety. The room was filled with hundreds of important guests, all watching every movement with keen interest. "Sir," James said quietly, approaching the suspicious man with measured steps, "might I have a word?" The man froze, his hand still partially inside his jacket. Sweat beaded on his forehead, despite the cool temperature in the throne room. James could see fear in the man's eyes, but also something else. Desperation. I need to," the man stammered, his accent thick with emotion. James maintained his professional demeanor, aware that dozens of eyes were now focused on the interaction. He couldn't create a scene without cause, but he also couldn't ignore his instincts. Years of experience had taught him to trust his gut, and right now, his gut was telling him that this man posed a threat. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable in the side chamber," James suggested, his voice calm but firm. We can discuss whatever concerns you might have." The man shook his head violently. "No, you don't understand. I have to. She needs to know." James realized that the conversation was beginning to draw attention from other guests. Queen Camilla herself glanced in their direction, her expression showing mild curiosity rather than concern. She trusted her guards implicitly, as she should, but James knew that any disruption during such an important event would reflect poorly on his leadership. "Sir, I'm going to need you to come with me," James said, stepping closer and placing his hand gently but firmly on the man's arm. That's when everything changed. The man jerked away from James's touch and stumbled backward, his hand flying out of his jacket. Instead of a weapon, as James had expected, a small photograph fluttered to the floor. The man dropped to his knees, reaching for it desperately. "My daughter," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "She's missing. The Queen. She's my only hope." James felt a mixture of relief and confusion wash over him. This wasn't an assassination attempt. It was a desperate father seeking help from the most powerful person he could find. The photograph showed a young girl, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, with bright eyes and a gap-toothed smile. The commotion had now drawn the attention of several guests, including some members of the press who were covering the event. James knew he had to handle this situation carefully. The man wasn't a threat, but his distress was genuine and heartbreaking. Queen Camilla, demonstrating the awareness that had made her such an effective royal, noticed the disturbance and began moving in their direction. Her security detail tensed, but she waved them back with a subtle gesture. She had seen James handle difficult situations before and trusted his judgment. "What seems to be the trouble, Captain Morrison?" she asked, her voice carrying both authority and compassion. James straightened to attention. "Your Majesty, this gentleman appears to be in some distress. He has a photograph of what he says is his missing daughter." The man looked up at Queen Camilla with eyes full of desperate hope. "Please, Your Majesty, my little Anna has been gone for 3 weeks. The police, they say they're doing everything, but you have resources, connections. I thought maybe—" Queen Camilla studied the man for a moment, then looked at James. The captain could see her weighing the situation, considering not just the human element but the political implications. Hundreds of guests were watching, many of them recording on their phones despite protocol against such behavior. "Rise, please," Queen Camilla said gently to the kneeling man. "What is your name?" "Victor Petrov, Your Majesty. I'm a teacher from Prague. I saved for 2 years to attend this reception, hoping I might have a chance to speak with you." James watched the Queen's expression soften slightly. She understood desperation, having seen it countless times in her years of public service. But she also understood protocol and the potential consequences of any action she might take. "Mr. Petrov," she said carefully, "while I understand your desperation, this is not the appropriate venue for such requests. There are proper channels." "Please," Victor interrupted, then immediately looked horrified at his breach of protocol. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty. I didn't mean to. It's just that those channels have failed me. My daughter could be—" He couldn't finish the sentence, his voice breaking with emotion. James felt sympathy for the man, but he also recognized that this situation was spiraling beyond his control. The press was definitely paying attention now, and any misstep could become an international incident. Queen Camilla glanced around the room, noting the attention they were receiving. She made a decision that would surprise everyone present, including James. "Captain Morrison," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the immediate area. "I believe this gentleman needs to sit down. He appears quite distressed." James understood immediately. The Queen was offering Victor a chance to compose himself while maintaining the dignity of the event. It was a masterful display of both compassion and protocol. "Of course, Your Majesty," James replied. "Sir, if you would take a seat over here." He gestured toward an ornate chair near the wall, positioned where Victor could remain in the room without disrupting the main proceedings. It was a compromise that acknowledged his distress while maintaining order. But as James guided Victor toward the chair, Queen Camilla did something unexpected. She followed them, moving away from the receiving line and the waiting dignitaries. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as guests realized the Queen was personally involving herself in whatever drama was unfolding. Your Majesty, James said quietly, perhaps it would be best if I handled this matter privately. Queen Camilla looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. There was something in her eyes, not displeasure, but a kind of testing, as if she were evaluating not just his handling of the situation, but his character. Take a seat, boy, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the now quiet throne room. The words hit James like a physical blow. Boy. In front of hundreds of international dignitaries, members of parliament, and the press, Queen Camilla had just addressed the captain of her guard as boy. The room fell completely silent, except for the soft clicking of camera shutters from the press section. James felt his face burn with embarrassment and something else. A deep hurt that he hadn't expected. He had dedicated his life to serving the crown, had earned his position through merit and sacrifice. To be dismissed so publicly, so casually, cut deeper than any physical wound. But his training held. Despite the humiliation, despite the confusion and hurt, James maintained his military bearing. He was a captain in the Queen's Guard, and he would act with dignity regardless of how he was treated. I prefer to stand, Your Majesty, he replied, his voice steady despite the emotional turmoil churning inside him. The response sent another wave of murmurs through the crowd. It was respectful but firm, acknowledging the Queen's command while politely declining to follow it. In the rigid hierarchy of royal protocol, it was virtually unprecedented. Queen Camilla raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting pushback. The tension in the room was palpable as guests waited to see how this unprecedented exchange would unfold. I beg your pardon, Captain, she said, her voice carrying a dangerous edge. James squared his shoulders, looking directly at his sovereign. He had reached a crossroads, and he knew that his next words would define not just this moment, but potentially his entire future. With respect, Your Majesty, my duty is to stand guard. I have taken an oath to protect the crown, and that oath doesn't permit me the luxury of sitting while on duty, regardless of the circumstances. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Victor, despite his distress over his missing daughter, seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. This was more than a breach of protocol. It was a young officer publicly standing his ground against the Queen herself. James knew he was risking everything, his career, his reputation, his future. But something deeper than protocol was driving him now. It was the voice of his father, reminding him that respect was earned, not given. It was the knowledge that his men were watching, learning from his example. It was the understanding that sometimes doing what's right mattered more than doing what's expected. Queen Camilla studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. The entire throne room held its breath, waiting to see how the most powerful woman in Britain would respond to such unprecedented defiance from one of her own officers. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, though in reality it lasted only seconds. Queen Camilla's eyes never left James's face as she processed his unprecedented response. Around them, the assembled dignitaries watched with barely concealed fascination, many of them pulling out phones despite strict protocol against recording during royal events. James felt sweat beginning to form under his ceremonial uniform, but his posture remained perfect. He had crossed a line that no officer in the history of the Queen's Guard had ever crossed, and he knew there would be consequences. But looking at Victor, still clutching the photograph of his missing daughter, James also knew he couldn't have acted differently. Captain Morrison, Queen Camilla said finally, her voice carrying an odd tone that James couldn't interpret. You seem to have forgotten your place. No, Your Majesty, James replied, his voice gaining strength. I know exactly what my place is. My place is standing between you and any threat that might arise. My place is ensuring that every person in this room goes home safely tonight. My place is upholding the honor and tradition of the Guard, even when it's difficult. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Several foreign diplomats exchanged glances, clearly fascinated by this breach in royal protocol. The British press corps was frantically scribbling notes, knowing they were witnessing something that would make headlines across the empire. Queen Camilla took a step closer to James, and he could see something shifting in her expression. What he had first taken for anger was beginning to look more like curiosity, perhaps even approval. And you believe that defying a direct order from your sovereign falls under those duties? she asked. James thought carefully before responding. He was walking a tightrope now, and one wrong word could end not just his career but potentially land him in serious legal trouble. Defying the monarch was no small matter in British law. I believe, Your Majesty, that my highest duty is to serve the crown with honor and integrity. Sometimes that means following orders without question. But sometimes... He paused, glancing at Victor, who was watching the exchange with growing amazement. Sometimes it means remembering why we serve in the first place. Victor suddenly stood, still clutching his daughter's photograph. Please, I don't want to cause trouble for this man. He was only trying to help me. If someone must be punished, let it be me. Queen Camilla turned to look at Victor, and James saw her expression soften slightly. The desperate father's willingness to protect a stranger seemed to resonate with her. Mr. Afris. Petrov, isn't it? She said gently. Tell me about your daughter. Victor's eyes lit up with hope, though his voice trembled as he spoke. Anna is 8 years old. She was walking home from school in Prague 3 weeks ago when she disappeared. The police believe she may have been taken by traffickers who bring children to Western Europe. I've exhausted every avenue in my country, Your Majesty. I came here because I heard that the British have the best intelligence services in the world. James watched Queen Camilla's face as Victor spoke. He could see her genuine compassion warring with the practical realities of her position. She couldn't simply intervene in every tragic case brought to her attention, but she also couldn't ignore the desperate plea of a father. Captain Morrison, Queen Camilla said, turning back to James, what would you do in this situation? The question caught James off guard. Was she really asking his opinion, after he had just defied her direct order in front of hundreds of witnesses? Your Majesty, I would want to help. Any father would move heaven and earth to find his child, and any decent person would want to assist him. But I also understand that your position requires careful consideration of the broader implications of any action. Queen Camilla nodded slowly. Indeed. And yet, here you stand, defying protocol to support a man you've just met. Why? James felt the weight of every eye in the room upon him. This was the moment that would define him, not just as an officer, but as a man. He thought of his father, of the values that had driven him to excel despite his humble origins. Because, Your Majesty, when I put on this uniform, I swore to protect people. Not just you, not just the nobility, but all people under the crown. Mr. Petrov may be from another country, but his daughter's life has value. His pain has meaning. If we ignore suffering simply because it's inconvenient or complicated, then what does our service really mean? The response clearly wasn't what Queen Camilla had expected, but James thought he saw a glimmer of respect in her eyes. She turned to address the room at large, her voice carrying easily through the grand space. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe we are witnessing something rather extraordinary here. Captain Morrison has just demonstrated the very qualities that make the British military the finest in the world: courage, compassion, and an unwavering commitment to what is right, even in the face of personal cost. James blinked in surprise. This wasn't the rebuke he had expected. Around the room, guests began to murmur with growing interest and approval. Queen Camilla continued, too often we become so focused on protocol and procedure that we forget the human element at the heart of everything we do. This young officer has reminded us all that true service sometimes requires us to risk everything for what we believe in. She turned back to James, and now her expression was clearly one of approval. Captain Morrison, your father would be proud of the man you've become. James felt his throat tighten with emotion. How did she know about his father? The question must have shown on his face because Queen Camilla smiled slightly. Did you think I didn't research my officers? I know about your background, about your father's sacrifice, about your journey from that mining town to this position. I also know that you've never once used that story to gain sympathy or advantage. You've simply worked harder than anyone else. The revelation stunned James. All this time he had assumed his background was either unknown or ignored by the royal family. To learn that Queen Camilla not only knew but respected his journey was overwhelming. However, Queen Camilla continued, and James tensed, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Your insubordination today cannot go unaddressed. You publicly defied a direct order from your sovereign, That is a serious breach of military discipline. James straightened to full attention. Yes, Your Majesty. I understand the consequences of my actions. Do you? Queen Camilla asked with a slight smile. I somehow doubt that. She turned to address Victor directly. Mr. Petrov, I cannot officially involve British intelligence in your daughter's case without proper diplomatic channels. However, I can ensure that the appropriate authorities are made aware of your situation. I will personally see that your case receives the attention it deserves. Victor dropped to his knees again, tears of gratitude streaming down his face. Thank you, Your Majesty. Thank you so much. Rise, please, Queen Camilla said gently. No one should have to kneel when asking for help to find their child. She then turned back to the assembled crowd, many of whom were still recording despite protocol. Now, regarding Captain Morrison's discipline, his actions today were indeed insubordinate, and such behavior cannot be overlooked. James braced himself for dismissal, court-martial, or worse. His career was over, but at least he had stood for something meaningful. Therefore, Queen Camilla announced, I am promoting Captain Morrison to the rank of Major with immediate effect. His new position will be as my personal security advisor, reporting directly to me on all matters of royal protection. The announcement sent shockwaves through the throne room. Gasps of surprise echoed from every corner as guests struggled to process what they had just witnessed. James himself stood frozen, unable to believe what he was hearing. Your Majesty, I don't understand, James stammered. Queen Camilla's smile broadened. Today, you showed me something that no amount of training or protocol can teach. Moral courage. You risked everything to stand up for what you believed was right. That is exactly the kind of thinking I need in someone responsible for my security. She paused, letting the significance of the moment sink in. You see, Major Morrison. That command to take a seat was a test. I needed to know if you would blindly follow orders or if you would think for yourself when the situation demanded it. Your response told me everything I needed to know about your character. James felt the world spinning around him. A test? All of this had been orchestrated to evaluate his judgment and integrity? The threat assessment reports on my desk have been concerning lately, Queen Camilla continued. I needed someone who wouldn't just follow protocol, but who would think creatively about protection. Someone who would put human dignity above rigid procedure when necessary. Today, you proved you are that person. Victor stood nearby, still in shock at the turn of events. The man who had simply wanted help finding his daughter had inadvertently witnessed a moment that would reshape royal security protocol. Queen Camilla addressed Victor once more. Mr. Petrov, I want you to know that Major Morrison will personally oversee the coordination with international authorities regarding your daughter's case. We have resources that might prove helpful in locating her. Your Majesty, Victor said, his voice barely above a whisper. I came here hoping for a miracle. I never imagined. Sometimes, Queen Camilla replied, miracles come in unexpected forms. Your courage in approaching me today, despite the risk, shows the same spirit that Major Morrison demonstrated. Both of you remind us all that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they're fighting for what matters most. The press corps was frantically documenting every word, knowing they were witnessing a story that would dominate news cycles for weeks. Here was a queen who had turned what appeared to be a security breach into a lesson about leadership and human dignity. Major James Morrison, the title still felt surreal, stood at attention as Queen Camilla prepared to return to her official duties. But before she left, she had one final comment. Major Morrison, your new duties begin immediately. I trust you'll continue to think for yourself, even when, especially when, it makes others uncomfortable. The Crown needs advisors who will challenge assumptions and fight for what's right, not just what's expedient. Yes, Your Majesty, James replied, his voice strong despite the emotional whirlwind of the past few minutes. I won't let you down. You already haven't, Queen Camilla said with a warm smile. Your father would indeed be very proud. As Queen Camilla returned to the receiving line to continue with the state reception, James found himself surrounded by fellow officers, diplomats, and press members, all eager to understand what they had just witnessed. But his attention remained focused on Victor, who was still clutching the photograph of his missing daughter. Major, Victor said quietly. I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me, James replied. You just need to have hope. We're going to find Anna. As the reception continued around them, neither man could have predicted how dramatically this day would change both their lives. For James, it was the beginning of a new career path that would revolutionize royal security. For Victor, it was the first real hope he had felt since his daughter disappeared. But the most important change was yet to come. Because Queen Camilla's decision to promote James wasn't just about rewarding moral courage. It was about preparing for challenges that she knew were coming, threats that would require someone willing to break protocol and think beyond traditional boundaries. The throne room gradually returned to its normal rhythm, but the ripple effects of those few extraordinary minutes would be felt for years to come. A young officer from a mining town had just proven that sometimes the most important qualification for leadership isn't following the rules. It's knowing when to break them. 3 weeks after the dramatic promotion in the throne room, Major James Morrison sat in his new office in Buckingham Palace, reviewing intelligence reports that would have been far above his clearance level just a month ago. The transition from guard captain to royal security advisor had been swift and intense, but Queen Camilla had been true to her word about trusting his judgment. Viktor Petrov's case had become James's first major assignment in his new role. Working with Interpol and MI6, they had traced a human trafficking network that stretched from Eastern Europe to London. The investigation had revealed something far more sinister than anyone had initially suspected. The criminal organization was specifically targeting children of activists and dissidents, using them as leverage against their parents. Anna Petrov hadn't been randomly selected. Her father, it turned out, had been quietly documenting corruption in Prague's city government through his work at a local school. The traffickers had taken Anna to silence him, never expecting that his desperate plea to Queen Camilla would trigger an international investigation. James was reviewing the latest surveillance reports when his secure phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he had been hoping to see for days. Morrison here, he answered. Major, this is Agent Sarah Chen from the London Metropolitan Police Counter-Trafficking Unit. We've got them. The safe house in East London, we're moving in now. James felt his heart race. Is the girl there, Anna? We have eyes on a child matching her description. Blonde hair, approximately 8 years old, wearing the same clothes described in the missing person report. We'll know for certain in minutes. I'm en route, James said, already reaching for his jacket. Don't move without me. The drive through London traffic felt endless, even with police escort clearing the way. James found himself thinking about Victor, who was currently staying in a modest hotel near the palace, waiting for news. The man had barely slept since arriving in London, spending his days walking the corridors of various government buildings as officials worked on his daughter's case. When James arrived at the safe house, the area was crawling with police vehicles and tactical teams. Agent Chen met him at the perimeter, her expression cautiously optimistic. We've secured the building, she reported. 12 suspects in custody, including the man we believe is running the entire UK operation. And Major, we found her. Anna Petrov is alive and appears physically unharmed. Relief flooded through James so powerfully that he had to steady himself against a nearby car. Can I see her? She's with social services right now, being checked over by medical personnel. She's frightened but responsive. Keeps asking for her papa in check. James closed his eyes briefly, thinking of Victor's face when he would deliver this news. Then his training kicked back in. What about the other children? This operation was larger than just Anna. Agent Chen's expression darkened. 7 other children recovered, ages 6 to 14. 3 different nationalities. This network was extensive, Major. Your decision to push this investigation may have saved dozens of lives. As they spoke, a medical examiner approached them. Major Morrison? The Petrov girl is asking for someone who speaks Czech. She seems to understand some English, but she's too frightened to respond properly. Viktor Petrov, her father, is in London, James said immediately. How quickly can we arrange a reunion? Given the circumstances and your authorization level, we can have him here within the hour, Agent Chen replied. Might I suggest we move to a more appropriate location? The child has been through enough trauma without being surrounded by crime scene investigators. James nodded. St. Mary's Hospital has a family crisis center. Let's take her there and bring Victor to meet us. An hour later, James stood outside a warm, comfortable room in the hospital's family services wing, watching through a window as Victor Petrov held his daughter for the first time in nearly a month. Anna clung to her father with desperate intensity, speaking rapidly in Czech while tears streamed down both their faces. Dr. Margaret Collins, the child psychologist overseeing Anna's care, joined James at the window. "Remarkable resilience," she observed quietly. "Whatever happened to her, she's maintained her spirit. That suggests she was never broken by the experience, which will be crucial for her recovery." "What happens now?" James asked. "Extensive counseling, certainly, but with her father's support and the knowledge that her ordeal is over, she has an excellent chance of full psychological recovery. Children are far more resilient than we often give them credit for." James felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to see Queen Camilla approaching, flanked by two discreet security officers. Her presence in the hospital was unannounced and unprecedented. "Your Majesty," James said, straightening to attention. "I wasn't expecting—" "I wanted to see the conclusion of this case personally," Queen Camilla interrupted gently. "How is she?" "Physically unharmed, traumatized but responding well to her father. The doctors are optimistic about her recovery." Queen Camilla looked through the window at the reunited family. Victor had noticed her presence and was attempting to stand, but she waved him back down with a gentle gesture. "This investigation uncovered something significant, didn't it?" she asked James. "Yes, Your Majesty. A network spanning multiple countries, specifically targeting children of political dissidents. We've rescued 7 other children, and our intelligence suggests this is just one cell of a much larger operation." Queen Camilla nodded thoughtfully. "And this all began because a desperate father broke protocol at a state reception, and you chose to listen rather than simply follow orders." "Yes, Your Majesty." "James," Queen Camilla said, using his first name for the first time since his promotion, "I need you to understand something. When I tested you that day, I already suspected that traditional security protocols were insufficient for modern threats. This case proves that point emphatically." She turned away from the window to face him directly. "Criminal organizations, terrorist groups, state actors, they all rely on predictability. They study our protocols, our procedures, our rigid adherence to hierarchy. What they can't plan for is human judgment, moral courage, and the willingness to break rules when lives are at stake." James listened intently as Queen Camilla continued. "Your new role isn't just about protecting me personally. It's about revolutionizing how the royal security services operate. I want you to build a team of people who think like you do. People who understand that sometimes the most dangerous thing we can do is exactly what our enemies expect." "I understand, Your Majesty. But such an approach will face resistance from traditional security services," Queen Camilla smiled. "Let them resist. Change is never comfortable for those invested in the status quo. But this case has given us something invaluable. Proof that your approach works. 7 children are alive today because you chose conscience over compliance." She paused, glancing back at Victor and Anna. "There's something else, James. Intelligence suggests that this trafficking network had plans to target members of the royal family. Specifically, younger royals who might be vulnerable during public appearances. Your investigation didn't just save Anna Petrov. It may have prevented an attack on the royal family itself." The revelation stunned James. "Your Majesty, why wasn't this information shared with me earlier?" "Because I needed to see how you would handle the case without that motivation. Anyone can work hard when they know royal lives are at stake. But you put everything on the line for a Czech school teacher's daughter. That told me everything I needed to know about your character." Victor Petrov suddenly appeared at the door, Anna still in his arms. The little girl had stopped crying but remained pressed against her father's shoulder, her eyes wide as she took in her surroundings. "Your Majesty," Victor said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't have words to express my gratitude. You could have ignored me, had me removed. But instead—" Queen Camilla stepped forward, speaking gently to Anna in what James recognized as fluent Czech. The little girl's eyes widened with surprise, and she actually smiled for the first time since her rescue. "She's very brave," Queen Camilla said, switching back to English. "Mr. Petrov, Your daughter's ordeal has led to the rescue of 7 other children and the dismantling of a network that threatened children across Europe. Her suffering was not in vain. Victor's eyes filled with tears again. She kept saying during those weeks that someone would come for her. I thought it was just a child's hope, but somehow she was right. Children often see more clearly than adults, Queen Camilla replied. They understand instinctively that good people will fight for them, even when the adults have forgotten that truth. Dr. Collins approached the group. I'm sorry to interrupt, but Anna needs rest now. The reunion is wonderful, but we don't want to overwhelm her. Queen Camilla nodded. Of course. Mr. Petrov, I understand you'll be staying in London for a few more days while Anna receives counseling? Yes, Your Majesty. The doctors say it's important for her adjustment. Then you'll be my guest at a private residence in Kensington. No press, no public events, just time for your family to heal. Victor looked stunned. Your Majesty, that's too generous. Nonsense. It's the very least we can do. Major Morrison will arrange the details. As the royal entourage prepared to leave, Queen Camilla had one final conversation with James. Your first case as my security advisor has exceeded all expectations, she said. But I suspect it's only the beginning. Are you prepared for what comes next? What do you mean, Your Majesty? Word of this case will spread, James. Other desperate people will come forward with cases that traditional authorities can't or won't handle. You've essentially created a new model of royal engagement with public service. That comes with enormous responsibility. James considered this. Are you suggesting that rescuing Anna Petrov will create more situations like this? I'm suggesting that what happened in that throne room 3 weeks ago changed something fundamental about how the monarchy relates to the people it serves. You showed that sometimes breaking the rules is the most loyal thing you can do. That's a powerful precedent. Queen Camilla looked back once more at Victor and Anna through the hospital room window. History will remember this day, James. Not because of some state ceremony or political negotiation, but because of father's love and a young officer's courage combined to save innocent lives. That's the kind of leadership the world needs more of. As they left the hospital, James reflected on the incredible journey that had brought him to this moment. From a mining town in Yorkshire to the inner circle of royal security, driven by principles his father had taught him decades ago. The boy who had been told to take a seat had instead chosen to stand up, and in doing so, had changed not just his own life but the lives of 8 children and their families. That evening, as news of the trafficking network's dismantling broke across international media, James realized that Queen Camilla had been right about creating precedent. His phone was already ringing with calls from other desperate families, other cases that had fallen through bureaucratic cracks. Standing in his new office, looking out at the London skyline, Major James Morrison understood that his real work was just beginning. He had learned that sometimes the most important victories came not from following orders, but from having the courage to question them. And in a world where rigid protocols often failed the most vulnerable people, that lesson would prove invaluable time and again. Anna Petrov slept peacefully that night for the first time in weeks, safe in her father's arms. And across Europe, 7 other families were reunited with children they had feared were lost forever. All because one young officer had remembered that serving the crown meant serving all people under its protection, regardless of protocol, hierarchy, or personal cost. The nation had indeed been stunned by Queen Camilla's command and Major Morrison's response that day in the throne room. But the real shock came in understanding what that exchange had truly accomplished. Not just the rescue of innocent children, but the birth of a new kind of royal service, one built on moral courage rather than blind obedience.